Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Mortgage. If you tuned in last time, you remember Mike. We were talking about his experience with his military career and then how he transitioned from military to civilian life. In the last video, we just started kind of talking about how Mike was learning or had been introduced to the service dog opportunity and what that could entail and how that could maybe help him with some of the challenges that he was dealing with, PTSD and some other things. So we're going to hop into there at this point there. So tell us a little bit. Obviously, you were telling us last time how you had started to learn about this service dog opportunity and what that meant.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, what that process is. How did you, once you learn about the service dog opportunity, what's the next step? Like what happened then?
Yeah, it's really an interesting story, right? So I think we talked about last time, I really hadn't grown up with dogs. I didn't know anything about dogs really, and the VA had said, you're going to need some counseling. We're going to set you up. You've got, in our opinion, we believe that a service dog would benefit you with both your mobility, your hearing, because it was impacting me at work, right? Because people would talk to me and I couldn't hear them. I didn't have hearing aids back then, because the VA wasn't paying for them back then, and they're like $10,000. I have to wear two, so they're like $10,000 every 3 years.
Wow.
And
each?
No, for the set.
Either way, okay.
Yeah, it's expensive. It's like between $7,000 and $10,000, and I was like, I can't afford that, And so they said, but it'll help because people would I'd been as an example for the hearing. Not only is it dangerous, but I was in D.C. working in D.C. and I went across the street and I never heard the fire truck, and this lady behind me yanked me. I looked, I didn't, but it was coming around the corner as I was looking the other way, and I'd have walked right in front of a fire truck, right? I didn't, and you're thinking, you would see it, but I was actually looking the other way as I was crossing, right? And then at the office, I'd been written up a couple times because there were people that said that they had come into the office, I'm working, and they came into my cubicle or my office and were talking, and I was just ignoring them. So they filed complaints. I never heard them, and they didn't know I had hearing issues, right? So even though it's okay, baby. So it starts to impact your job, and then you go to meetings, and you don't hear everything correctly, and you're taking notes, but then you get the wrong date or the wrong, and you're like, no, but this is what you said at the meeting, and then you find out that you heard it wrong, right? It was getting really bad. It
wasn't like, hey, I turned it up TV a little bit, but it was your hearing was really bad.
I've got 92% loss in my right ear and 68% loss in my left ear.
And that's from your service?
Yeah, so without my hearing aids, there's no sound for me. You got to be right up, I got to be right next to you to hear you, right? Because I used to think my car was so quiet, and I found out that after I got hearing aids, man, it was so loud. And I was like, oh my gosh. But yeah, it's really bad, and it's good and bad. When I don't want to hear the kids, I just turn them off. So they said that some service dogs are trained to help with that, right? So when someone calls your name, right, she'll alert to you, she'll nudge you. Someone's trying to get your attention, and then with mobility, because my back issues they're still prevalent, and then with PTS, right, they do cognitive kind of therapy where they interrupt those behaviors that are typical with PTS. At that time, this is probably 2016. Things were getting really bad. Like I said, we talked about last time, I'd come home and my daughter would hide because the stress levels that just radiating. And you think that's normal, right? This is a comfort zone for me, but you don't realize how it's negatively impacting. And then I started to see it firsthand. And then, one of the things that I learned about and from other veterans, and this really hit me hard too, was that there's this thing called secondary PTS, where when you have children that are of an age that can be influenced, they're young, 4, 5, 6, they can start mimicking your PTSD behavior, right? So meaning that they will over-respond and be to situations, normal situations that an average kid would either not think about or just be like, oh, they would have a normal response to, but they because they learn, they mimic their parents, right? They learn, Chev, down, no, down, come here, down, I'm okay. You can never lie with a service. Yeah, no, she doesn't believe you. You can never lie with a service dog, man, because they rat you out every time. So when I talk about it, right, it's like things change. So we're gonna push through, okay?
So right now, she's sensing
a change from the norm, right?
Like, what is she sensing? Like
So like my heart rate will go up, like
she can sense it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I don't know if it's they hear it, they smell it, or there's a chemical change, or she just sees it, or all of the above. But like, when we talk about these things, obviously it brings back, like, your mind starts, and I think there's behaviors that go with it. And
no, she's staring at me. Is she mad at me for making you talk about
Well, what they do is they escalate. Yeah, so they'll escalate their behavior till you kind of get back to that normal state. So normally what she'll do is she'll pick up on it and she'll do like what she's doing now, right? Sometimes she'll try to get in my lap, or she wants me to focus on her and pet her. And what that does is that interrupts that behavior, right? Like when I start thinking about negative things or stuff like what we're talking about, right? She picks up on it, and what they do is they interrupt that behavior, and they want you to pet them and go to a happy place, right? Because the dogs like you when you're happy, and they don't like it when you're sad.
Sure.
I mean, just putting it simplistically, right? Then they'll escalate, right? At least she will. Like right now, so now she's getting physical, right? Like she's like, hey, pay attention to me. And then if you keep ignoring her, then she'll start pawing at me, right? And then eventually she'll back up and she'll bark. Right, no, Chev, we're not coming up here. No, ma'am, come here. So she'll bark, right, and she'll get your attention. And that's also so that if I'm around my family, and let's say you go off into a deep, dark thought process, right, and you're going down that dark hole, and I'm not paying attention to her, she'll bark to get other people's attention, like Gina's or the kids, to be like, hey,
I need some backup.
Yeah, I need some backup. And then eventually she'll jump up in my face and start licking my face. Now I haven't had that for a while, right, like, we're pretty good, but when I talk about it, right, this is kind of like, she knows that we're talking about things that she's like, hey, I remember these aren't things we talk about anymore. We're past all this. So, she'll probably do this throughout.
I don't mind if she's up here.
No, her feet were muddy from when I took her out. I don't want her to, but that's what she does. But it's great because like when you're by yourself, right, like if I, and this is a great segue to taking us back to what we were talking. I know I'm kind of all over. No. I'm sorry. So when yep. See, so it's very distinct, right? Because she'll nudge her head underneath you, and she's just like, "Hey, pet me, focus on me. Let's not go down these thought processes." And over time, it does. At least for me, it's been really helpful.
I bet
it's completely changed my life. But when we found out about them, I wanted to find out more, and it just so happens here in our local area at the center, the Fredericksburg Civic Center, is that what they call it? Or the, up there in South Point, or not South Point, but in like where they hold all the events and stuff like that.
The convention center?
Yeah, the convention center. They had this big thing over a weekend, and some of the service dog foundations were going to be there. And I just wanted to go kind of collect information, and Gina and I wanted to see, is it real, is it possible, or is it just a money grab kind of thing? And unfortunately, it's not a place I would typically go, because at that point, my PTSD was in full swing, like the worst it had ever been. So being in large crowds, like I had to drive around the building twice, like where are my exits? Like if something goes down, what do I got? How am I getting out? How am I getting my family out? And that many people, I mean, there were thousands of people there. And I wasn't, there was no way. I convinced myself I'm going to go. And I had my oldest daughter and my wife with me, and I thought, okay, I'll go in, I'll get the information, and I'll get out, right? And we went in there, and I was doing okay, and I'm walking, trying to find these booths, and there was one for Paws for Vets that they had told me about, and I could go get some information. And I walked up there, and this is before I knew anything about the program or dogs or anything. And I think I'd been inside for maybe 10 minutes. and I'm soaked, dude. I am sweating.
Oh.
Yeah, man, my PTSD. And the hard part is when you first get diagnosed with it, in most cases, when you start treating it at first, it gets way worse, because you start having to deal with it. You start having to talk about it, right? And then the nightmares and the behavior gets a lot worse, which I didn't know. Nobody told me that it gets way worse. I had I just went into it blindly because they said, yeah, do this. And so I was at that point where things were starting to get really bad. And I'm in this, there's thousands of people, and there's booths everywhere. There's all these, I'm thinking, yeah, there's all these hidden corners. I got all these blind spots. I'm scanning.
So you're like in military mode.
Yeah, I'm scanning, man, and I'm just like and there's just so many, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and I'm trying to keep cool at the same time because I don't want my wife and my daughter to be upset. Sure. And so I'm walking down the aisles, and I see the Pause for Vets booth, and there's this old Vietnam dude sitting there, and this really big, 6'6" guy, and they both have these dogs, and I'm like, and as I'm walking towards them, dude, it's running down my arms, sweat's running down my arm, not because I was nervous, but I'm just looking at all these hidden, I can't cover everything.
Right.
That's what's going through my mind, and I'm like, where's my exits? How do I get my kid and wife out of here if something goes down? That's what's going through my mind. And I get to the booth, and I'm kind of I'm still scanning, and I'm asking questions as fast as I can, do you have any pamphlets? And unbeknownst to me, my wife and daughter had been following me, right? They didn't believe one word that I had told them that I was good. And as my wife said, she goes, you were leaving a sweat trail, dripping off your arms and stuff, and your face was flush, and you could see you weren't happy. And I was like, I didn't know they were behind me. They were probably about 4 or 5 booths behind me. They were watching to see how I was going to handle it. And as I start walking up, this guy, amazing dude, he has a golden, and as I walk up, that dog turned and walked right up to me, which they're not supposed to do, right? They're supposed to ignore people. Walked right up to me and started alerting on me. I didn't know what it was doing, but it was so then the other guy who had a dog with him, that dog did the same thing. I had 2 dogs on me, alerting like Cheverly was doing. And I didn't know at the time, I had no idea what that was. I thought they were just, being happy puppy dogs and having no idea that they weren't supposed to even be doing that.
Right.
And, but what they were doing their job. They
Right.
had picked up on, my stress and everything. And I can't even look at them because I'm looking for exits. I'm thinking, how many feet do I have between here and the exit? And okay, I gotta, that's what's going on. And I'm trying to ask questions and, can I get some pamphlets? I'll just read the pamphlets and I'm out, And at that point, I got 1 dog in front, 1 dog behind me, and I'm trying to move and get out. And the dogs they're getting more aggressive. They're getting in front of me and won't let me leave. And so this gentleman who's sitting in the chair, he's like, hey, you doing okay? And I said, yeah. He goes, brother, no, really, are you doing okay? And he goes, because the dogs are saying you're not doing too well. And his wife, who was also helping in the booth, comes over and she introduced super woman, super lovely woman, name is Susan, and she comes over and she hands me a bottle of water and she goes, you don't look so good. And I was like, oh, thanks, but I could tell at that point I snapped back to what's going, around me, and I'm soaked, man. The front and top of my shirt is wet, and she says, why don't you sit down? She gives me her chair, and I'm drinking the water, and I got 1 dog sitting here, and the other one sitting like Cheverly's doing right now, and they're just like, hey, pet me. And the 2 guys are like, hey, why don't you pet the dog and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, okay, how the hell do you even pet a dog, right?
Right.
So I'm petting them, and then they're just leaning on me. And unbeknownst to me, and the only reason I know this is because my wife told me this, and my daughter, I sat with those 2 guys and those dogs, as while I was petting the dog, my wife said that your whole demeanor changed. You went from, I thought you were going to explode, like in a bad Simpsons show or something. She goes, your whole demeanor just changed. And she goes, you were there for 45 minutes talking to these guys and because they're brothers in arms. You know, both were veterans, and they'd been through what I had already been through, right? Very similar stories, and had the need for service dogs, and they were already through the programs and stuff like that. So they told me about the program, told me what the dogs can do. We started talking brother to brother, and they said, I think you'd be a really good candidate for this program. And then I realized, oh my God, I don't even know my wife. It's like it hit me, and I thought it was just a couple minutes, you know. And I did. I wasn't sweating anymore. I was really, but I didn't pick up on any of that. Right? Like I had no idea how long I'd been there. I was just talking to some brothers, and then my wife and daughter came over in tears, and were like, oh my God, I haven't seen you like that in so long. And I thought, oh man, I'm radiating, right? Like, so I thought I was doing something wrong again, and I grabbed the pamphlets, and my wife talked to the two guys and asked some questions. And at that point, I had to get out. I was like, I got to go. And so it's like, you know, it started ramping back up. And so I went beeline for the exit, and I went home. And I was kind of reading through the pamphlets. I went and checked the website for Paws for Vets. And at that point, I remember we went to bed that night, and you had to fill out, part of the application process was, they don't guarantee everybody that applies gets accepted. They have a, you know, because there's, I think it was like at that time 1 out of every 5, you know, get reviewed even, just because the amount of dogs. Now this is going back a few years,
Sure.
So it might be a lot better now. But you had to fill out a pretty, it wasn't lengthy, but basically there were 3 questions in there. It was like 46 questions total. Some of them were like, are you a veteran? The other one was like, why do you want a service dog? The other one was like, are there events that led you to, you know, and you have to, like, you can't just say, I think I need a service dog. Like, I had a doctor's note from the Department of Veterans Affairs, a letter saying, here's our recommendation and here why. But then there's like these 3 questions where you have to fill out, what situations do you feel may have led up to this? I couldn't do it, man. I couldn't put it down on paper. 3 days I didn't sleep. I kept trying to fill it out, and then the more I got into the writing those situations about my friend Jay, you know, who and the survivor's guilt, and then my buddies who passed away either through suicide or killed in the war, or just like I couldn't put it on paper, because it was the first time I was having to deal with it in my new life, right? Like with my wife, my wonderful wife, and my beautiful daughter, and I was like, I can't open that can of worms, man. If I open it, all hell's gonna break loose. I've already been there, and I know where, you know, and I was scared to death. I couldn't do it. And for 3 days, I didn't sleep, and I sat in front of that computer, could not write it out. And Gina finally came to me, her and my oldest daughter, and said, Dad, you got to do this. You have to do it. Because they won't accept it if you don't. And they say right there, if you don't fill these sections out, it won't get accepted. So on the 3rd day, I finally, my daughter said to me, she said, Dad, you got to do it for us. And it was just like, you know, a stab in the heart. She said, and Gina, you know, said to me, she said, something's wrong. Like, things are changing, and they're not in a good way, you know. And she assured me, we're not leaving you. We're not going to, because my thought was she's going to leave me too, and I'm back to where I was. And so, you know, and trust is a big issue, you know, at that point in time in my life. And so on the 4th morning, I remember I was just like, I told Gina, I need you to be in here. I got to write this, and I've never talked about it. There were things in there that I never talked to her about, I never opened up about, and it just came out. It was like Ernest Hemingway threw up. You know, it was like, so I submitted it, and I absolutely did not expect to get accepted into the program at all. I told her they're never gonna, because I've met other veterans through the counseling that way worse stories than mine. And I thought, there's no way. And it was like a 2 to 3 week, I think, you know, they would make a decision. I got a call like 24 hours later. I wanted to know when I could come have an initial consult with them. And I was like, oh.
So they saw yours like
Yeah, they saw it, and they were like, we got to get this guy in here really bad. And the 2 gentlemen I had met Randy Powers and the other gentleman, and I apologize, I can't remember his name at the moment, when I talked to them, I had opened up a little bit, and they had made references. So when my paperwork went in, they said, use our names, and let them know that we said you're a good candidate. And so they reached, because they do their homework at Pause for Vets. So I think it's a great program, and they did reach back out to them and say, hey, did you meet this guy, and blah, blah, blah. They do their homework.
Right.
And so I got accepted into the program, which then I was scared to death because I found out that filling out that paperwork was like the very first step in the healing process. You've got to be able to talk about it. And that's where you get into the program. And if you want, I can tell you about the program. You're going to laugh, but the Pause for Vets program, it's changed now because they have this place called Addieways. It's a whole compound, basically, where they expedite the process. But back then, you would have to go to Wilmington, North Carolina, like once a month, once you're in the program. And you meet with them, and the healing process starts. And I think it has a lot to deal with where you are, what your skill sets are to deal with it, what you've been through, even having been around. Are you a dog person, or
Right.
Because I had never been around dogs, never had any interest in dogs, and I didn't even know what do you do with a dog, right? Like I literally had no idea how this was going to work, but I knew I had to save my family, and I wasn't going to go down that road again, no matter what. And so, and this process may have changed a little bit since I went through it, but they're basically, once you go down, you meet with their team, and some of them are like counselors, and it's a support team. You meet with them, and you have to kind of reiterate a little bit about what you wrote. They'll ask you some questions over the phone. They make and there's a whole group of people at that time used to listen in on the call, right? Then introduce themselves, and you have an initial consult with them, and they make a team-based decision on whether you're a good candidate or not. Because they don't want to, if they don't think they can help you, they don't want to put you through the process. So I had that call with them, which was really hard. Like, I had to have Gina with me when I had that call. And one of the big concerns I had was I was ruining my family again. Like I said, because all that radiates, and you teach your kids, they have secondary PTS, they mimic that behavior, and you don't want your kids doing that. And I was starting to really go down that deep, I call it the pit. And I was so far in that pit, I didn't even know how deep it was at that point. I mean, I was really falling fast. And then what happens is they schedule a time, you go down to Wilmington, or at least that time you go down to Wilmington, North Carolina, and you have I think you're there for 3 to 4 days at a time when you go down there. And the first one is they tell you about the program. They talk about common symptoms of people in the program. They talk about PTSD. They talk about suicide. They talk about all this other. There's a lot that they cover. It's really in depth. And you're there with a bunch of other people in the same boat, and you don't know any of these people. They're all mostly veterans. Sometimes they have their families and their spouse and the entire family with them. And it's hard to watch, right? Like, because they understand that if you don't heal the whole family unit, nobody gets better. Okay. You can't just heal the veteran, because, like, we had just slightly discussed previously, is that if you heal the veteran and the family needs support, the veteran will only go so far, but every time he comes home, the family is the anchor keeping him from getting better. So the family has to be raised up and healed at the same time, right? Or it could be vice versa. The family's getting support, but the veteran's not. So every time they get around the veteran, he's dragging them, he or she's dragging them back down. So you have to raise both at the same time. And at that time, I think a lot of people didn't realize, like, that was new. That was newly being discovered and made aware. And so, and you could see some of these guys or girls come in, and their families look like zombies. Like the life had been drained out of them. And the veteran was like, in their normal go mode, but the families were just like nothing there. And then, after, the time you see the family on the next visit, you'll see them all come in, and the guys, like, it's flipped. Like, the families look like alive. There's color in their skin. You know what I mean? So you end up having that first consult with them, and it's a couple days long. They tell you about the program, what to expect, what the process is, and then I think what's unique about this program is there's a bunch of different subsets of the Pause for People's Foundation. It's a nonprofit, and Pause for Vets is one of them. And the service dogs are free to veterans if you get accepted to the program. I think what you have to understand is these dogs are, I think nowadays, everything included from the time they're selected, because not all dogs can be a service animal,
Sure.
right? From the time they're selected to the time that they meet their potential veteran, yeah, I'm listening. It's about $75,000 per dog once it's all said and done. So they're not cheap. Like I couldn't afford that.
Like the training and everything.
Everything, raising them, training, feeding, medical, and because usually about anywhere from the first year and a half to 2 years, they spend from the time they're old enough to be weaned from their mother until they meet their veteran, they're in training, right? And then part of that is they go to the puppy center when they can be taken from their moms, at a healthy, a good age. And then they go to the puppy center where they learn like their first 10 commands. This may have changed since then, but that puppy center, it's all puppies, and they 24/7, someone's there with them, going potty, house train, you know what I mean, like potty training.
Sure.
They start and they're cuddled, they spend more time with people, right? So right away they're being evaluated for which ones are going to make it, might be good dogs for the program and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like some have a strong sense of smell, some are really good at picking up on certain things. I don't know all the details of how they do what they do. And then I think they do that for like 9 to 12 weeks. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that because I know it's changed since I was in the program. But then they have this thing called Pause for Prisoners. So it's really amazing, and there's a reason why I'm sharing this because it comes into play later on in the process. So then the dogs, once they reach a certain age and they've passed the first couple stages of training, they go to Pause for Prisoners. So these are like prisons in West Virginia, I think Pennsylvania, and so what it is they have a program there that allows inmates to learn real-world skills and training service dogs, right? Like the first 100, 110 commands. They stay there with the prisoners or at the compound and they get to train with them. And so for a lot of these prisoners, it's the first time they're seeing unconditional love. They're learning real-world skills. Some of these people are getting out. Some of them are in there for life. And then so when they're training these dogs, they're help training these dogs to give back to the community.
Okay.
Right? So it's a win-win for them and the dogs, right? Yeah. And so they go through that, and it's hard on them, right? Because some of the ones that were there, and I'll get into this a little bit. It's called the bump, which is so cool. They train them, and then they have this thing called a bump, and then this whole time while you're going through this, there's a few months at a time, like where you go in for a week of training, then you're out for a month. You go in for a week. It's like 4 days, 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
You're staying in Wilmington, North Carolina, and you're getting classes, and they're teaching you about how to be a handler, because it's not just like you just get this dog.
Right.
You have to know how to handle. You have to know how to handle the dog, and use the dog to mitigate your own needs, right?
Okay.
And so it's always and I made this big mistake, is thinking it's a one-way relationship. It's not. It's constant. You're constantly watching her, and she's constantly watching you, and the two of you learn to communicate. Like when she's telling me, hey, something's up, right? Or, and I need to watch her for that, right? Or she'll start escalating her behavior. So the dogs go through that training. So now it's about 1.5 years that they've been getting all this training, everything from potty training to like the first 110 commands, depending in the basic commands. And then you go to something they call a bump, and it's at the prisons, right? You go there with your family, and you go to the prison. And what's unique about this program is you don't get to choose the dog. You don't go, oh, that dog's cool, I want that dog. The dog has to choose you.
Oh.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird.
So is it just, like you go, is it just you, or are there other potential veterans there too?
Oh, so you're with a cohort, right? So there's they'll schedule it out, and there may be 10 or 15 other veterans there with you, with their families, sometimes more, right? And you're going, like the first one I went to was a woman's prison in West Virginia. And I was a little nervous about being in a prison. Like, I was like, this is not the place I want to go. You know, and
well,
you got
with your family, right?
Yeah, and you're in the gymnasium. You go in there, and on one side are all the criminals, right, or all the inmates, I should say, because, and I'll get into that. And it was one of the most life-changing events for me, almost as much as the war changed me. And then you've got the families on this side of the gymnasium. You know, it's like a basketball court. You know, it's sectioned off in half. They got inmates over here with all your guards, and then you've got the families over here. And on this side, you've got the Pause for Vets people and what they call the PMET team. It might be called something different now, but it was basically the people who are watching the dogs. There's therapists there, like psychologists and stuff, and the people who run Pause for Vets, right? So they're watching all the interaction. And then over here, you've got all the inmates, right? And so what happens is this whole thing is about healing. It's so weird. Like, and when you first get into it, you don't know what's going on. They tell you, but you don't realize the impact, right? So first, when you get in there, it's tense because you're in this room full of, some of these are, you know, they were like serious killers, you know. But the first one I went to it's an all-women's prison, and I don't think it really made a difference. But some of them are selected. No, Chef, down. I'm listening, baby. But we got to talk about it today, okay? It's okay. So some of the inmates get up and they tell their stories. And some of these stories are gut-wrenching. Like, mom and dad are killed, you know, through drugs or whatever like that. She goes to live with an uncle. Uncle molests her for years. She's getting to be a teenager, doesn't want to put up with it anymore, and kills him, right? But because she's got no one to defend her, she's got no money, she's got nowhere to go, the state just prosecutes her to the fullest, and now she's got life or 20 years. What was she supposed to do? Right? There were so many stories like that. Some of them were rich kids who just wanted some excitement and made a bad decision on a day and accidentally hurt somebody enough that now they're serving, you know, like 20 years or something like that. Some of them were just DUIs and they killed family. Some of them were just horrific stories, and you're thinking, why would you make that decision? But so they're up there telling you their story, their personal story. Some of them will say, I deserve life. I only got 20 years. I don't want parole. What I did was horrific, and I don't plan to ask for parole. And others were just like, I made a big mistake. And what you find out later is that's part of their process. That's part of their healing process. Because all of them are trainers for the dogs.
Okay.
So for some of them, they're never getting out. Others, they're learning real-world skills. They're getting unconditional love from the animals they've never experienced. So it's changing them. And you have to be in really good standing at the prison to even be part of the program.
I bet,
all that. So then they go up and they do that. And I'm telling you, man, there wasn't a dry eye on the civilian side of the house. Because, and one of the things that I realized for a lot of these younger inmates was that my childhood and their childhood paralleled in many different points. They were identical, you know, not being molested or anything like that, but there were so many, like, abandonment, no support, all the way up until there was a point where, because I was a guy, I could physically get my way out of that situation. But as a woman, a young woman, maybe not even a teen, she had no way other than, you know what I mean? And that was that's the splitting point. So the childhoods were almost identical until that point.
Sure.
And it made me realize, wow, like, it's not, I had no idea. Like, I didn't even know what to make of it, you know, and except that I felt really bad for some of these people, and like the courts just reamed them, you know, and made examples of them, or, you know, it was, assuming that everything is true and up front, it was heart-wrenching. So then what happens is, as the veterans, you have to get up, and then they've done their piece.
Right.
Remember, these are the ones that are training your dog.
Right.
You know, the basic commands. And then you have to get up as a veteran. And so you've got your families over here, And it's a big group, probably about 100 people, and you got about 100 inmates over here. And you have to get up, and you're standing at this podium, and you have to tell your story as much as you're comfortable telling. And at that point, I had never talked about it, except to Gina slightly, a little bit here and there. And I wrote about it once, just like a month or so before that event. And other than that, I didn't talk about any of that, ever. Like, it was so buried so deep. When I first got up there, I went into work mode, and I'm like, I'm just going to give this presentation, I'm just going to talk about it, and I'm going to be done. I couldn't talk, I couldn't speak, man. Nothing would come out. And I'm just staring, and I'm looking across this sea of inmates, and I've just heard their stories, and I am floored that I didn't end up in jail, right? Because it was so, they paralleled so much childhood. And I am just floored, and I'm like, and nothing would come out. I couldn't do it. And this Marine, this Vietnam Marine, walked up behind me. He's crying. And at this point, I can't talk. I can't say anything. And I'm starting to get like tunnel vision. And he comes up and he puts his hand on my shoulder real firm like, right? And he's a Vietnam Marine. And he's like, he just whispers in my ear, I got your 6. I got your 6, brother. And he hands me this coin, right? This challenge coin. And it was his Purple Heart. And he says, it's okay. I got your 6. And then it was just like Niagara Falls. I'm just like, I can't speak. I couldn't muster it. And I look over and I see my wife and my daughter in tears. And I'm like, I'm failing. So at that point, they're like, we're going to take a break. They said, we want to take a break. So I go outside and they bring like 10 dogs. And they're all like on me and, bringing me back down. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. And I just was shocked that I couldn't speak. Like, it really surprised me because I didn't plan to talk about anything. Like, I didn't have a script or anything. I was just like, I'd give like a 2-minute. I couldn't speak, man. And then I was shutting down fast. So one of the girls that was there, who I give so much credit to with Paws for Vets, she came over and she sat next to me. Now, I'm like, at that point in my life, like, I was still working out a lot. I'm 240 pounds, work benching like 300 pounds, and she's like maybe 5 foot tall, maybe 100 pounds wet, like out of the pool. And she's like, Mike, it's okay, but I need you to tell the story because there are people here that need to hear it. And I'm like, I can't talk. And she's like, you have to. This is part of the healing process. And I'm like, okay. So I took about 15 minutes, and all these dogs are laying on me, just alerting on me, and I'm like, I can do this. So I come back in, we finish the break, I come in, and I just start talking. And I got her standing behind me and this Marine. I've never met this guy. And I'm looking at this coin, this Purple Heart coin. I still have it to this day, and he's given me his Purple Heart challenge coin. And he's just saying, I got your 6, man. So I start telling my story, a lot of what we talked about before, a lot more in depth. And I don't remember a thing I said. I just know it just kept coming out.
Sure.
And I couldn't turn it off, right? Like, it was just, we popped the top, and it was just spewing. And I couldn't look at anybody. I was so embarrassed. I felt like this big. I was so embarrassed. And I remember when I got done, I looked up, and there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. And I thought something had happened. And my wife's crying. The dog Paws for Vets people are like looking at me. They're handing out handkerchiefs, and the inmates, everybody's in tears, right? And there's this big line of people wanting to come up and hug me. And I was floored because I really didn't think the story was, there's so many veterans with worse stories that I've met than mine. And I just didn't feel deserving of it, right? And so then what they do is, after you go, everybody gets a chance to do that. All the veterans get a chance to tell that, okay? Then what they do is they start, this is the bump process. So now all this is out there in the open, right? We've showed respect to the inmates. The inmates have told us their stories. We've told them ours. In a lot of cases, the first time any of us have ever talked about it is ever. And then what they do is they bring out, you're sitting in a chair. Again, you got your families, about 100 people on the left side, inmates, all the trainers on the right. and you got the Pause for Vets team and the inmates team on the right. And you're sitting right in the middle in front of everybody. Now everybody remembers your story, what you talked about, and they start bringing dogs out in groups of 5.
Okay.
And they'll see how the dogs react to you. Because remember, you don't get to pick the dog.
Sure.
Dog has to pick
Right.
you. And so the first, and they bring them out in sets of 4 or 5. I can remember the first couple dogs, the trainer would come out, because they're excited to see the dog bump with somebody. That means the dog could potentially find its forever home. Shep, down, down, down. And so I know, I'm listening, baby, but we're going to talk about it today, okay? And so I remember the first couple dogs like wouldn't even get within 15 feet of me, like backpedaling, like, don't bring me near this human.
Huh.
Oh, it was heart-wrenching because, and I thought for sure I would be like one of the first, in my mind, I thought I'd be one of the first people done with the program. Like, I get through the program, I get out, I get my dog, I'm good.
Right.
I hold the record, at least that I know of, for being the taking the longest to get through the program. It's normally, back then it was like a 6-month program to go through the whole process, do the introduction, bump with your dog, train with your dog, get your certifications, and then you take the dog home and you start working with your dog. It took me 2.5 years.
Wow.
So, but at the bump, what happens, they would bring dog after dog, and they'd either had no interest in me whatsoever, or they wouldn't get near me. And so what they do is the first 4 dogs, only one wasn't afraid of me, but showed no interest. It kind of circled me and then went back to his trainer and kind of like looked around like, no. And I remember some of the dogs backpedaling when they started bringing them out, like, no, don't, I can't handle that.
Wow.
My levels were so high. Like, my anxiety and stress was so high. Like I said, like on a scale on 1 to 10, I was living at a 40. And when I'd get really stressed, I'm like at 100, right? And that was normal for me. That's where I functioned. And so I remember we went through 4 sets of dogs, and I got to the point where I started tearing up because I started thinking, even the dogs, I'm too broken for this program. And I just remember on the 4th set, there was only 1 dog that showed any interest, and most people, it would be quite a few dogs each group, right? And then they have to determine which one's the best one, and they'll narrow it down, and then when one of the dogs bumps with you, and I'll explain how that happens. But so normally what happens is, when there's a dog that shows a lot of interest to you, what they do is they'll come and they'll sit in your lap, or they'll come up to you and they'll sniff you and they'll do their thing, and then they bump you with their nose. And that's their signal, I got this. I got this person. So typically what that is that dog is selecting that person. No, ma'am, we don't come up on this couch. And so we went through like 4 sets, and then I finally had 1 dog that showed some interest. And her name was Rosie, was another golden retriever. Okay. Unfortunately, Rosie didn't make it through the training program, and I don't know if it was my stress levels were too high for her. So she didn't make it through. She didn't make it through the training. It was weird. It was like we had gone. So what happens is after you bump with a dog, you're assigned to that dog, and then they start training. There's a few months where they start training that dog very specifically for your specific needs, like for hearing, mobility, right, and PTS, right?
Oh, so Cheverly's trained for you to exactly what they've identified as, or you've identified as the things you deal with.
Yeah, and so they get specialized training once you bump. So now you're officially a team, but you've got to start training with that dog. So after that, what happens is after you bump with the dog, you're set up as a team, and you start going down to Wilmington and you start training with that dog. So while you're away for the next month, you come back the following month, and she's had like 3.5, 4 weeks of training specific for your needs. Say it's mobility, right, or hearing, right, or whatever. So she's getting intensive training. He or she's getting intensive training for your specific needs, or they're just reinforcing it, right? And it may be like, do you have other animals at home, right? Let's say if you have cats, they're introducing that dog to cats. And most of the time they've already done that. But maybe you've got horses, like say you got a farm or something, and they're gonna work with that dog to be comfortable around those situations.
Okay.
So your whole environment, that dog is getting exposed to similar situations. So when you get home and start working with her at home, So that happens for a few months, and depending on how you're working as a team, it could be a few months, it could be a few visits, or it could be longer if you're like me, where I couldn't get the walls down enough to bond with the dog, right? It's not about learning all the commands, because 110 plus commands for a dog is a lot to remember. And I was so focused on just getting the commands right, I couldn't get my walls down far enough to bond with the dog, because I didn't trust people. I didn't trust anybody. And so Rosie and I were starting to struggle a little bit, and then they had some changes with some handlers that were doing the training, and something happened, and it could have been my stress levels when I trained with her, but she didn't make it through. Then I went through the whole process again and bumped with this black or a brown lab that had named Lansing, I think. Beautiful dog. He was top of his class, but once he got to the prison training, and some dogs, because it's very structured, right? Once they get out of that, some dogs just don't do well getting out of that environment. He didn't do well getting out of that environment, and they disqualified him from being certified.
Oh, out of the structure.
Yeah. Once he got out of that, he was like buck wild, like, woo, I'm free. So they're like, he will not make a good service dog. So now I'm 2 down, and I'm starting to think I'm never going to get through this program. Like at that point I was holding the title for the longest moron to get through the program, and I was starting to really feel down. And they never gave up on me. CC and Randy Powers and a couple of the staff members were just, at that point, I think they really realized I wasn't giving up, but I was really starting to struggle. And I went down, they called me to come down for an emergency bump to see, they had some couple dogs in mind, they wanted to see what would happen. And I remember I was there going through the same training I'd been through twice before. Not their fault, it happens, because not all dogs get through the program. And I think of all the service dogs and programs that I've seen and supported, not only through work, but just meeting other veterans, I think it's one of the best programs. I wouldn't, me personally, I think it's one of the better ones. They did not give up on me, and our relationship had started to change, and I with them, meaning that I think they might have been considering me a lost cause. And then I think, looking back, like as my walls were coming down, because I was getting counseling for PTSD and behavioral, cognitive therapy and stuff like that. And I think what transpired was I was changing, I was letting them into my life a little bit more, and they were awesome. And so I went down, I remember, and I was sitting on the floor in one of the classrooms. Everybody had their dogs but me, and this is the 3rd time I'm back. And I could recite the classes to you at this point, and I was just feeling really low. And I'm sitting on the floor, petting someone else's dog, right? And the director of the program at that time said, "Hey, Mike, I want to bring this dog in. I got an idea, and I want to see what happens." And they opened the door, and there's this beautiful golden just staring at me. She looks at me, she looks at the trainer drops the leash, and was like, "Go see." Now, this is like an unofficial bump, right? Like if the dog's interested, it'll come over, and we'll see what happens. She ran right to me, sat in my lap, and bumped me right in the chin, hard. And I didn't realize she had bumped me. I was just so ecstatic that one of the dogs, was like excited to
actually... Came to you?
Yeah, it came to me and not like backing away. And it was Cheverly. And she actually came from a small litter out of Cheverly, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. And her siblings were there with her, right? So she's got like 2 brothers and 2 other sisters.
All in the program?
I don't know if they were all in the program, but I know her brother was, right? So I spent that whole day with her, and she just sat in my lap. They moved me to the front of the classroom, and I just sat and bonded with her. I was floored, man. And it didn't dawn on me. She actually bumped with me, like she nudged me with her nose. It was hard. I just thought she was playing.
Right.
But unbeknownst to me at the time, everybody was watching. Like all the staff knew what they were trying to do except for me. I was just excited. And so then the next day, so I spent the whole day with her, and it was an 8 or 9 hour day doing the exercises, walking and just seeing how we worked together and stuff. And it was unlike any of the other dogs I had trained with. And then the next day they gave me her brother, and because I was so, in fact, I went back to the hotel, because you stay at a hotel while you're down there, and I took her brother, Kensington, I think is his name, back to the hotel. They said, take him back to the hotel with you. And so I went up into my room later that evening. I was exhausted. It's exhausting work, by the way. It's because it's very emotional. It's very draining. You're having to put out a lot of energy talking about things you don't want to talk about, and then trying to learn to be a handler. It's a lot. I mean, it's exhausting, right? If anybody thinks it's super easy, you're either not doing it right or you haven't done it.
Just from listening to what you've said,
yeah,
honestly, nothing about it sounds easy.
For
what they're doing, it probably shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing. It sounds like you're putting in some work.
Oh man.
As well.
It's brutal because they're taking you to every place you don't want to be, right? And I can get into that a little bit later. But she, like I said, that second day they gave me her brother, and they wanted to compare a couple other dogs to see. And I didn't know that. I thought they were just like, oh, it didn't work out, we're going to try this other dog. I was kind of heartbroken.
So you still didn't realize that?
No, I never picked up. I was just so excited that she didn't run from me. And so then Kensington, I took him up so I spent the next day training with him, and it was not good. It didn't go well. I was getting frustrated. He was getting frustrated. And then they said, well, let's take him back to the hotel room. And so the whole thing was a test, right? Because I went back it was like 5 o'clock, and I'm like, I'm wiped out. I've got to get a short nap and let Kensington rest. And they do give the dogs breaks throughout the day during the training sessions and stuff. So, because you're spending from like 8 o'clock in the morning until 5:30 at night training with these dogs when you're down there, right? To build that relationship, to learn how to handle them. It's exhausting, and you're going to places you don't want to be, like at the mall or crowds.
Oh, so you're out in it.
Yeah, you're out in it. And they know your weaknesses. Like mine's crying, like at that time was crying babies, right? Because of my time in the Gulf and some of the stuff that happened there. And then being in with a lot of people, malls, you would never catch me in a mall. And I was leaving water trails of sweat everywhere I was walking, right? Like literally, like you could follow the sweat trail.
Like a snail.
Yeah, it was bad. And so you're out in those, and it's exhausting. And so I went back to the room with Kensington, and after about 3 hours, I couldn't take it anymore. We weren't jiving. And the dog was barking nonstop, wouldn't come near me. I'm trying to, do the yoga. I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying to get to a happy, could not. The dog was saying, no, hell no. Yeah, you remember, huh? So it was about 8 o'clock. I just take Kensington. I go downstairs. I'm on the 5th floor. I go down to the meeting rooms, and the entire staff has just been sitting there waiting because they knew it wasn't a good fit, and they were waiting to see if I was going to try and force it, or if I had gotten my walls down enough to be cognizant of this is not a good fit. So I walk in and I say, I'm in tears, to be honest. Not like I'm a big crier, but because I feel horrible, like I failed again. That's how I was feeling. And I went in to Terry, who's like the director of the program, and I said, Terry, I don't think it's a good fit. And the whole staff starts clapping. And they're like, it's not a good fit. We've been waiting to find out how long it's going to take you to realize that. And I was like, what? So they're like, they were applauding me. They were telling me, and then they brought Cheverly back out, and I took her up to my room. She just sat in my lap, and we watched TV till like 2 in the morning. I was just petting her, and we played ball inside the hotel room, and I almost didn't sleep that night. We were just hanging out, and then I spent the rest of that time training with her. And then there was one other dog I spent about a half a day with, and I just said, no, I don't feel it. Nothing like, and they're like, good, because it's not,
So do they do that with everybody, or
no, I don't
because
know.
You had taken a couple times?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that. I just know that for me, they were waiting for me, and they were like, man, I was getting tired. I didn't think you were coming back then. But they said I could hear the dog barking, all the way from the 5th floor, and because he just didn't want to be around me.
Right.
When we got behind closed doors, he was like, oh, hell no, not for me, man. And after a while, his training was just, he was like, I'm done with you, And Cheverly was just, when they brought her, they brought her back out, gave her to me, and said, take her up to your hotel room, get some sleep. We hung out till like 2 a.m. just playing and hanging out, and she slept right next to me, would not leave my side. And from that point forward, I just spent the rest of my time. Every month I'd go back down there, I would train with her specifically. At that point, we were a team. It was official. Then there's like remember, you're only going down there once a month.
Okay.
So now the program's much faster. You stay there. You have the option to stay there on the compound, and you get it's a much more expedited process. But I'd go down there once a month for like 3 or 4 days, train with her, and you're learning how to do a handler. They're putting you in all the situations that are triggers for you, malls, restaurants. You're learning how to use her in all those situations and how to handle her and work with her. And they do it deliberately. It's deliberate to trigger you, and you have to use the dog to self, facilitate, because they're not going to be there all the time, right? And so when you guys are showing progress, at that point, you earn your black vest, right? Which means you're officially a team and you're doing well together. After you demonstrate that you guys know how to use the dog, they will send her home with you. So now you got like a 6-month, I call it a probation period. So she actually goes home with you, and you start you start using her in your real world, work, whatever your situation was, and and then you go back every month with them. They check your progress. And if you're doing well, then you eventually get scheduled for your red vest test, which means if you pass that, you and her both have public access. So there's a big difference between an emotional support pet, which does not have public access, right, and a service dog like Cheverly that's ADI certified. So they set the standard for service animals, right? Only about 2 to 3% of all the service dog organizations provide ADI certification, which means like if you have standards like industry best practices for whatever you do, like for mortgage lending or realty or anything like that, there's a best practice, right? And there's a certification. Paws for Vets actually helps set that standard in the industry, and so a very small percentage of those organizations provide ADI certification. And so once you get your red vest and you've passed that test, and let me tell you, brother, you're training a lot, and they're putting, like for me, it was going to the mall, being in a restaurant with my back to everybody, being around crying babies, right? Because they would literally find crying baby in the mall and bring me to it. And you could just see the sweat start to erupt, and it was like, but you got to mitigate it. You have to learn to use the dog to mitigate it. And then once you pass that, you and the dog are officially, she's permanent. She goes to her forever home. And then you stay as a team. And we've been a team for, 6 years now.
That's awesome.
So, and that's, I think when you and I first met, it was right after I got her home after our red vest test. And I was trying to raise, because the dogs are free. And like I'd mentioned before, they're about $75,000 if you pay for them outright. But for veterans through this program, donations go to that nonprofit, and they help pay for that. And then they ask if you're willing, and you don't have to, but they ask if you are willing or capable, if they have fundraisers in your area to help pay it forward. Because the dogs you're getting are paid forward from people before you, right? Other veterans and them going out and raising money and stuff. And so when you came and helped me do that event, that was the first event I had done, and I was nervous. I still wasn't comfortable being out in public. And you're taking the microphone, and we had such a bad, it was rainy, cold, nasty, and that area just doesn't produce, from a business perspective, I think if you'd had a lot of years of doing it there, not you, but the organization that was hosting it, there would be maybe a bigger crowd, but it wasn't necessarily the crowd that had all the money in the world, right, at a racetrack in the middle. But we were, you don't know until you start doing them, and I'd never done anything like that. And then you're taking the microphone, you're making all these donations on your own, and I'm sitting back kind of watching, trying to talk to people who want to meet Cheverly. And I I'll never forget that day, because Gina and I, when we went home, we talked about it, and I was like, I don't even know Matt very well, and he's out there in the rain. I know, baby. See, so this is progress, where she's saying, you're not paying attention, and you're not listening to me. So now she's going to get in my face, and she's going to be like, hey, I want you to focus on me. I want you to focus on me. Can I have a kiss? Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice of you. Okay, I'm going to try and just chill, okay? But I can never thank you enough, right? And it's through, like, the money we raised, right, like went to my PIF, which paid forward for the next group of veterans.
That's awesome, man.
You know, and, you know, I think that when community members pull together, it's so different than, like, before I met Gina and I was on my own and there was no support whatsoever and I was not in a community. There was no community where I lived. Like, neighbors didn't even know each other, you know, and it was just a really bad scenario. And I think when, you know, I'm a big believer in take care of yourself and your family, treat your neighbors, love your neighbors, and then you work out from there. You work out into your community, right? And if everybody, I mean, not everybody's going to do it, but I think if most people do that, the community really helps take care of itself. And that day you came out and helped me, like you were taking the mic and you were like trying to get people to donate money, and there were people, there were people who didn't want to give up $1, and you were like coaxing them, trying to tell the story about the program and DJing to get people to put $1 in that jar, $1. And then you had guys that were walking by who you didn't even have to say anything to, and they were dropping a $50 bill in there, you know. But the people who didn't even want to put $1 in there to support a veteran, you know, and it really, your actions on that day like really inspired me, which is why.
Well, thanks, man. I never knew that. I appreciate that, man.
It was, you know, you have to, like for you, it might have just been, hey, I just want to help. You know, I see the need, I want to help, and you know, and everybody has their reasons for doing it, but it's one of the things that made me think that day was maybe I should try and help some of these nonprofits and try and help other veterans in the community I'm living in, because it was a life-changing day for me. Because you got to remember, I was still at that point where I didn't really trust people. And then here's this guy, Matt, who I barely knew, who was supporting me and the cause and getting, I mean, like, it was like trying to bleed water out of a cactus to get people to make a $1 donation. But we did pretty good.
Yep.
And I had never done one, and I was scared to death. Like, there were enough people there that I was struggling just to stay focused with Cheverly. And like, how was I going to talk to these people? And you're up there just with the mic, just emceeing the whole thing. And I was blown away, man.
And I'll tell you, I think it was one of the first times we met.
Yeah.
And so I didn't even know what you were going through.
Yeah, it's not something I typically talk about.
Well, no, of course, yeah. Right.
But it changed my perspective on things because, like, I know Gina knew you, but to me it was just another, you know, it's one of her colleagues, and I know she talks very highly of her colleagues, but when I saw you step out for someone you didn't even know, and you worked that event, that's when I said, you know what, because I was trying to find work at that time because I was struggling to get work, because as soon as people saw the service dog, they don't want to hire you, right? It's just sad, but I said, well, maybe I can go help these nonprofits, and I started working with the nonprofits, you know, to try and help other veterans and take what I had learned, golden strands of love ring, right? Take what I had learned through my experience and see if I could help other nonprofits. But it inspired me that much, you know, and that's when I realized, you know, Gina made a comment, my wife made a comment, imagine what a whole group of people in a community just taking one day, helping somebody just because they want to help. And she said, look how much it affected you, meaning me, and then me going out and helping those nonprofits get things going and get started, and, you know, traveling and meeting them and getting people to donate for them for a couple years, you know. And so just one act of, and I think for me that, like, I still struggle with trust, right? You know, that'll probably be an ongoing thing, but that day, like, Gina never said anything to me about it. I talked to her, I said, why would Matt come out and do all that? And she goes, that's because there are people in the world that are like that. And she goes, but you've never been around people like that. And like I said, that was a game changer for me. And
dude, that's awesome, man. Well,
it
makes you feel good. Like I said, I didn't honestly, it's the first time I've heard you say this.
No, it changed. It was a big change for me. And I shared that, like, even Katie, you remember, because Katie was there with us. She was so young. She wrote about it in a paper at her school. You know, about one small act of kindness can make a big difference. And you know, I know that's what you're all about, brother. Like I know it, like in my heart of hearts, like I know that's how you do business. I know that's how you treat people because I've seen you and heard you, and I know people you've worked with. And that inspired me to like change my whole perspective on at least my business life and partially in my personal life, because now I'm like at work, I'm like, one of my things I try to do is I just try to be helpful. I don't need to be successful per se in my corporate career. I just need to be invaluable, and if that means helping, like I don't say almost like, if you want me to help, I'll help. I don't care, because even if it's a junior member or a senior member, I don't care. Because if at the end of the day, and a lot of this stems from that day you and I were together, my mentality is if at the end of the day I've relieved some stress for this person and they get home to their family either safe, they get home safely and earlier, or they get home to their families sooner and get more time with their kids, then it's a win-win. There was a lot to learn from that day. I know you're thinking that's kind of crazy.
No, man, it's awesome, because sometimes you do things just because you want to.
Yeah.
And so to hear, and I was perfectly happy with that, but then to hear again, this is the first time I've ever heard this from you, to hear that perspective, and that just, for me, it makes you like want to do 50 more.
It does me too. It makes me, yeah.
So it's awesome, and I appreciate you sharing the information about like the process from when you first kind of heard about the service dog opportunity, and going through that process and finding your perfect match, and that's incredible, man. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And YouTube world, I hope you appreciate the message that Mike has shared. And if you know a veteran, or maybe you are a veteran yourself that's going through some stuff like Mike's been dealing with, I hope this has been helpful. We're going to do one more video where we kind of talk about how Mike's life has been impacted by Cheverly, and his family's life has been impacted by Cheverly. But thank you for tuning in this video. Look out for the next one, and check it out. We hope that this has been something that you've enjoyed watching and getting to learn about. It's definitely been a pleasure for me and an honor.
Well, the pleasure's mine.
Thanks,
man.
brother.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
It's been awesome. Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.